I'm the manager of the Water Resources Department for San Joaquin County and provide oversight for the Npdes program. Thanks for taking the time. Hopefully you'll find this helpful. We look forward and appreciate the chance to provide you with an overview of the revised new development and redevelopment standards for the Stormwater Quality Control Criteria Plan. You'll hear us refer to that throughout the presentation as the Criteria Plan. That's part of the overall stormwater management plan for the area that covers large part of the county, city of Stockton, and the areas that we manage. These changes for us went into effect on January 2021. A lot of the stuff you'll probably be pretty familiar with. They were management practices and desirable things that we were doing in the past that now are taking on a little bit more weight of regulation, I suppose. Or at least the standards that are applied during our review of developments or redevelopment projects. We'll look forward to answering any questions you might have, but first, let's take a quick review of the program and what you'll see. Our agenda today is to cover the meeting logistics and workshop overview, talk about the stormwater program and why we needed to make modifications. And then we'll head into what's new and how it might affect you and your role in participating in development and redevelopment activities, and available resources that are going to be on our website to help you with any compliance efforts that you may be endeavoring into. Next slide, please. The purpose of our program is, as we mentioned, was to provide you the overview, describe the development and redevelopment standards that you'll be required to use, highlight the modifications that have been made since the 2009 criteria plan was released and how those updates directly affect you, and notify you again of the tools that we are making available to help out with that. Next slide, please. Speakers and hosts today. I mentioned me, Matt Zadar. Roy Valdez on my staff is a management analyst, and he's the program manager for all things Npdes. Dagmar Asani, program manager in a similar role for the city of Stockton. Alina Constantinescu, project engineer with Larry Walker and Associates. And LWA has done a bang-up job helping us with all of our regional board water quality compliance program efforts under the Npdes permits that we maintain and the city maintains. And Mario Caballero, who's the program manager for the city of Stockton, will be helping us with the Q&A once we get through things. So next slide, please. For the overview, I'm going to turn this over to Roy Valdez, who will tell you all about the history, the background, and the relevancy. So Roy, I'm going to turn it over to you, sir.
Thank you, Matt. Before we get going on the presentation, I just want to take a few minutes just to cover some general housekeeping items. Today's session is being recorded and it's going to be posted on the county stormwater program webpage. I would say probably by Friday you can look for it there, and everything should be ready to go for you to access. If you're interested in revisiting the content, or if you know others that couldn't participate in this workshop or the two other workshops that we had to put on, just tell them to go on the webpage, and two of those previous workshops are going to be uploaded on there. As Matt mentioned, today's presentation is going to run about 30 minutes or so. During that time, we want to make sure that everyone's muted to avoid any background distractions. If you have any questions along the way, you can submit them using the chat room feature. I'm going to be going over how to use that function in just a minute. Once the formal presentation is over, we're going to take some time to answer your questions from there for whatever gets submitted in the chat room. If you are participating in the meeting by phone and you don't have access to the chat room, we're going to take some time at the end of the open calls to answer those questions. So we're going to be addressing the questions as they come in, and then we'll make sure to get to anybody who has any questions that's on the phone. And if we run out of time, we're going to be open to taking any follow-up questions that we couldn't get to after the presentation. One last thing, as we get the workshop going, feel free to submit your name and the company in the chat room that you work for or that you're here representing. It's an easy way just to test out that the feature's working properly and lets us know who's who's all here today. So just feel free to do that now that we have a little bit of time. So next slide. There we go. So let's just run through a couple of quick things for the Microsoft Teams meeting features that I just talked about. You should see a window just like this one. This is your control panel right here. Here's a closer look. If you, your control panel has several features. This is the mic icon that turns your microphone on and off when you click on it. When you're muted, the mic icon is going to have a line through it like it does here. You should have your microphone on mute during the presentation. This is the chat room feature that we spoke about earlier. If you have a question during the presentation, go ahead and click on this icon and it's going to take you to the chat room. We're going to be monitoring the chat room and we're going to be responding to the questions as we're able to at the end of the presentation for the allotted time. Once we conclude the presentation and we turn on the Q&A session, we're going to be answering questions chronologically. So first question that gets submitted is going to be the first one that we're going to be addressing. And as an alternative to the chat room, you can use the raise your hand feature, which is this hand icon right here. We're not going to be taking questions during the presentation, but you can raise your hand during the Q&A and if you'd like for us to call on you directly. So instead of wanting to type in the question, if you feel more comfortable just voicing what your question is, you also have that option. And when if we end up using this feature, then we'll go ahead and take your microphone off of mute. So now that we got that stuff out of the way, let's go ahead and get to the good stuff for the program overview. Consistent with the Clean Water Act and state legislation, San Joaquin County and the city of Stockton are regulated by municipal stormwater permits that are issued by the state of California. These permits require that the county and city develop and implement a wide range of programs, including new development and redevelopment program. In the Central Valley, there are 2 municipal stormwater permits that apply. The first is a Phase 1 permit. This permit applies to large and medium-sized municipalities. It was first issued in the 1990s, and it's been renewed about every 5 years since then, the most recent of which was renewed in 2016. This permit applies to the city and portions of the county in and immediately surrounding the city. This area is referred to as the Stockton Urbanized area, or the SUA if you happen to see that throughout the presentation or another reading material. The second permit is the Phase 2 permit. This permit applies to small municipalities and was first issued in the late 1990s, early 2000s. The most recent permit was adopted in 2013. This permit applies to more rural areas of the county. For the purposes of today's workshops, we're going to be focused on the new development and redevelopment standards that are required by the Phase 1 permit and the criteria plan. However, it should be noted that there are a lot of similarities between the Phase 2 permit and the Phase 1 permit, so that's just something to keep in mind as we go forward. Next slide, there we go. The Stockton Urbanized area is shown here. This is what's regulated under the Phase 1 permit and the criteria plan that applies to it. It can be seen here on this map right here. Next slide, please. As I mentioned previously, the Phase 1 permit requires that the county and city develop a wide range of programs and plans. The overreaching plan that is required is the Stormwater Management Plan, or SWAMP. This is a principal policy and guidance document for the stormwater program in the Stockton Urbanized area. The SWAMP outlines all of the programs and plans that have to be implemented. One of those programs and plans that supports the implementation is a criteria plan. When the Phase 1 permit was renewed in 2016, the county and city were required to review the 2009 criteria plan and make any necessary revisions to ensure that it was up to date and consistent with the 2016 permit requirements. Next slide, please. The other major regulatory initiative that occurred since the development of the 2009 criteria plan is the adoption of the statewide trash amendments in 2015. The trash amendments require that the county and city capture and manage trash that is generated within the urban landscape so that it doesn't discharge into local water bodies. The county and city have developed a robust program to address these requirements, including the incorporation of full capture systems within priority new development and redevelopment projects. The state has identified a range of high flow capacity devices and smaller inlet-based devices that qualify as full capture systems, like we can see on the image. Some of these devices that are shown here on the graphic are hydrodynamic separators, gross solid removal devices, connector pipe screens, baskets, and screens. The design may be different, but the function is the same for all of these, as preventing any trash that may accumulate before it gets to our local waterways. Next slide, please. In summation, since the development of the 2009 criteria plan, there have been two significant sets of regulatory requirements that have been adopted by the state that the county and city need to comply with. They are post-construction and load reductions and full capture systems. As such, we have identified the programs and plans that need to be updated, one of which includes the criteria plan. Let me go ahead and introduce Dagmara Sani with the City of Stockton. She's going to provide a brief overview of the updated criteria plan. Go ahead and take it away, Dagmara.
Thank you, Roy. As Roy mentioned, the criteria plan establishes the development standards for priority projects and priority land use projects. The goals of the criteria plan are to provide clear new development and redevelopment standards for developers, design and agency engineers, and planners to use in the selection and implementation of control measures. It is also to emphasize the implementation of low impact development and volume reduction based strategies. The goals of the criteria plan are to provide maintenance procedures to ensure that selected control measures are maintained to provide effective long-term pollution control. Next slide. The criteria plan has actually been around for the past 18 years. It was initially developed in 2003, November, in response to the first Phase 1 stormwater permit. After the adoption of the renewed permit in 2006, the plan underwent a major revision in March of 2009 to incorporate LID and volume reduction-based principles and requirements. Since the last major revision in 2009, the two regulatory actions that have occurred are the adoption of the statewide trash amendments and the region-wide permit, both of which require the county and city to assess if revisions are necessary to the criteria plan. As a result, the criteria plan was revised in late 2020. Next slide. Although the criteria plan was revised in late 2020, it is largely the same as the 2009 version. The requirements for projects to incorporate LID-based principles and control measures, as well as volume reduction requirements, have been in place for the past decade. The revisions in 2020, which Alina will review in more detail, are focused on full capture trash systems for priority projects and enhancing the requirements for projects to meet volume reduction requirements. Next slide. The city and the county will review each project currently under review to determine which development standards will apply. Next slide. To walk you through the details of the updates to the 2020 criteria plan and how those updates affect you, please welcome Alina Constantinescu from Larry Walker Associates. Alina works in the stormwater arena on LID post-construction manuals and develops stormwater pollution prevention plans. She's been a central contributor to the criteria plan updates and is a qualified SWIP developer and certified green infrastructure practitioner. Alina?
Thank you so much, Dagmara. Thank you. So my portion of the presentation gives an overview of the most important changes in the recent update to the criteria plan, as well as how these changes affect your projects. I will focus on four main changes outlined here. Items 1 and 2, these represent one of the most substantive changes to the criteria plan since the 2009 document does not address priority land use projects. And we'll go over them in a second. So both priority projects previously defined in the criteria plan and this new category of priority land use projects are now subject to the statewide trash amendments. And by applying trash controls now, the city and county will not have to retrofit these areas in the future. So it's a very beneficial addition to this plan. On item 3, the revised plan increases the emphasis on pollutant load reductions through low impact development. So these load reductions are a regulatory requirement needed so that water bodies in our area meet water quality standards. And the criteria plan also clarifies the conditions that have to be met for a development to qualify for a waiver from the volume reduction requirements. We'll discuss that too. Finally, item 4 refers to editorial changes that were made to be consistent with the 2016 region-wide permit and to the recent trash amendments, and to clarify definitions and requirements throughout the document. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the revised criteria plan introduces a new category of projects, priority land use projects. If your development falls into this category, it is subject to the criteria plan and it needs to comply with trash control requirements. And I will briefly review each definition. They're listed here. So priority land use projects are high density residential projects with at least 10 developed dwelling units per acre. They can be industrial projects with primary activities involving product manufacture, storage, or distribution. Things like warehouses, junkyards, wholesale businesses, they would fall under this industrial category. Commercial projects include sale or transfer of goods or services to consumers in your particular project, or things like business or professional buildings, shops, restaurants, theater, etc. Mixed urban developments are just that, mix of either high density residential, industrial, or commercial land uses. And public transportation development involves facilities or sites where public transit agencies' vehicles load or unload passengers or goods. So bus stations and stops would be an example. Next slide, please. So I will review how the criteria plan applies to this new category of projects. So under the PLU project must include control to address trash, and project proponents need to include trash controls in their stormwater quality control and maintenance plans that you submit for these projects. With any project that is subject to the criteria plan, whether it's a new priority land use project or just a priority project that has been previously defined in other versions of the criteria plan, you just start at step 1. You're looking to see what is your project type and is it subject to this plan? If the answer is no, it's a very easy exercise. The city and county might still require you to put in some stormwater measures, but this criteria plan doesn't necessarily apply to you. If it is, however, project that is subject to the criteria plan, you would move on to understand whether is it a priority land use only project, in which case essentially only trash controls apply, or is it a priority land use project and a priority project, in which case more requirements apply, and we'll go over them later. But if it's just a PLU only project, then you move on to step 2, where you collect the site information. So you put down everything you know about the project, of course, the address, the size of the development, the type of activities that are happening or are expected to be happening at this development, anything like the watershed that it's in. There are forms in the plan that help you walk you through what you need to collect and include in your submittal. And then we jump to the step 6. We left it at step 6. Where you just explain what kind of trash controls. How are you going to control trash in the stormwater coming off your site? There's a list of trash control facilities that you could, measures, I suppose, that you can implement. You go through them, you pick one, and you submit it. You put everything together in your stormwater quality control plan and maintenance plan. you submit it to the counter and you can continue the project design process. So for purely projects, it's a fairly simple process because only trash controls apply. We'll go into more complicated diagrams later, but next slide, please. Okay, so another change to the manual is that now trash controls also apply to priority projects. So all previously applicable requirements for priority projects continue to apply. These are stormwater volume reduction, site design measures, treatment control measures, LID, etc. Trash controls is now added to the mix. But just let's go briefly over what exactly are priority projects. This is a refresher, not much has changed here. So a priority project is defined as follows. It could be a residential project where a residential subdivision of 10 housing units or more. Any commercial and industrial active developments over 5,000 square feet are also priority projects. Parking lots over 5,000 square feet or with more than 25 parking spaces are also priority projects. And significant redevelopment projects are also priority projects. And we will go over the definition of significant redevelopment because we fine-tuned it in the plan. So I have a couple of slides later just focusing on that. But these are the main categories for priority projects. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. As I mentioned, all previously applicable requirements for priority projects continue to apply. So in addition to site design control, volume reduction, etc., your submittal, your stormwater quality control and maintenance plan submittal will also include controls to address trash. So if you look at this chart, the highlighted information in step 6 is really the only change to the process. And it just ensures that now your project is fully compliant with this criteria plan. So we're applying trash control. That's really the only change we made on this chart. I will still review the chart in detail, but just so you know, there's nothing all that new about it, other than on top of everything else, now you have to take care of trash control. So the first few steps in the process have not changed. Step 1 is determining your project type, similarly to before. Is it subject to this manual? Is it a priority project? Step 2, you collect your site information, everything from the address to the type of activities involved at your site. Steps 3 and 4, you apply site design and source controls. These are detailed in the manual. And under step 5, you apply the volume reduction requirements. You calculate the volume reduction requirements and apply volume reduction measures. Okay, so I'm gonna zoom into the kind of the bottom side of the chart where we highlight the trash control requirements. So next slide, please. Okay, so this slide starts up with step 5. And it's good to start this slide with this, which goes over the volume reduction requirement, because it's a good refresher for the overall existing requirements in the criteria plan. The volume reduction piece is essential for priority projects. This is a requirement that the post-project stormwater volume leaving your site does not exceed the stormwater volume that would have been released under pre-project conditions. So if you're at the step 5, and the next question is, once you apply volume reduction measures, is the volume reduction requirement met? It's entirely possible that your site design measures from step 3 or some volume reduction measures you applied under step 5 have reduced your runoff enough to bring it back to pre-project conditions. And if that's the case, then the answer to the first question on this slide is yes. And you can move on to step 6, in this case over to the left of the slide. Step 6 is where you make sure that the stormwater leaving the site is properly treated and that those treatment controls account for trash. So in this step, you calculate the SQDV and SQDF values and use them as your design criteria in terms of volume or rainfall intensity for treatment controls. And trash controls have to account for the same volume or rainfall intensity criteria as other measures implemented at the site. Alternatively, let's say that the volume reduction requirement has not been met and the answer to that question is no. Then you move over to step 6 on the right-hand side of the slide. Under step 6 here, in addition to the treatment control measures mentioned before, additional volume reduction measures also have to be added. So this side of the flow chart essentially becomes an iterative process where additional measures are added until both volume reduction and treatment controls are met. Once all those conditions are satisfied, you can move on. And the final step, just like with the PLU project, would be to develop and submit the stormwater quality control plan and maintenance plan for approval. I want to draw attention to the fact that it is possible that volume reduction requirements are unfeasible for your site. If that's the case, one of the options that is also mentioned on this chart is to complete a waiver. And we'll talk about waivers in the next slide in more detail, but it is mentioned here. So, okay, I guess we can go to the next slide. Next slide, please. Okay, thank you. Okay, so as I noted, if full volume reductions through site design measures or low impact development is infeasible, you have the option to complete a waiver. The waiver was part of the 2009 criteria plan, so it's not new. But the recent revisions to the criteria plan clarify conditions that need to be met for a project to qualify for a waiver. You can find these conditions listed in section 5 and appendix C of the criteria plan. Most important thing to keep in mind is that a waiver is an exemption, it's not a rule. Okay, economic hardship is not a qualifying condition for getting a waiver. It is the burden of proof is on you, the applicant, to show that there is technical infeasibility and that your project site absolutely needs a waiver. And it's also important to know that if a project qualifies for the waiver, you must propose an alternative compliance design. And such a design must demonstrate that the portion of volume that cannot be reliably retained on site will instead be treated and temporarily held on site, and it will be released into the city and county stormwater network once the storm event passed. So just because you're getting a waiver doesn't mean all of a sudden all your runoff can just go into the municipal stormwater system with absolutely no controls. It needs to be held, it needs to be treated, and it will eventually be released after the storm passes. Next slide, please. We're already on point 4 of my revisions to the criteria plan. So the final topic we want to highlight in terms of revisions to the criteria plan is related to edits made for clarification or consistency with the new permit terminology. The plan has been in use for over 15 years now, so we took this opportunity to improve it and clarify issues that keep coming up in questions. And one such example I like to highlight is the definition for significant redevelopment. Significant redevelopment projects subject to the criteria plan consist of the creation or addition of at least 5,000 square feet of impervious surfaces on an already developed site. So some examples include expansion of a building footprint, addition or replacement of a structure, we'll get back to this one in a moment, replacement of impervious surfaces that is not part of a routine maintenance activity, and land disturbing activities related to structural or impervious surfaces. And I want to highlight that the criteria plan now includes footnotes to clarify what is meant by replacement of impervious surfaces and by routine maintenance activities. So replacement of impervious surfaces includes any activity where impervious materials are removed, exposing underlying soil during construction. And routine maintenance are activities conducted to maintain original line and grade and or hydraulic capacity, as long as such activity does not disturb the base. But if the activity reaches or disturbs the soil under the base, then it is not considered routine maintenance. Next slide, please. Thank you. Another point of clarification for significant redevelopment was added to the criteria plan to explain how requirements apply for additions. If an addition is less than 50% of the original development, post-construction stormwater requirements only apply to the addition. So for example, if a 5,000 square foot addition is built for an existing 10,000 square foot building, post-construction stormwater requirements apply to the 5,000 square foot addition only. Next slide, please. Okay, so just a quick recap of the revisions to the criteria plan. We discussed a new category of projects, priority land use projects. And we also discussed that trash control requirements apply to both this new priority land use project category, as well as priority projects which have been part of the criteria plan before. We also discussed volume reduction requirements and clarifications to the waiver process. And finally, we reviewed some clarifying language for the definition of significant redevelopment projects. I'll be here for the Q&A, of course, so don't forget to drop your questions in the chat. And now I'll turn it back to Roy to share with you information about resources available outside of today's workshop. Roy?
Thank you, Alina. That was very informative. I'm sure we're going to get some really good questions once we get the Q&A going. So as Alina mentioned, for more information, you can find the criteria plan and other valuable resources on the county and the city's stormwater program pages. This is a screenshot of what the county stormwater page looks like. So if you click on that link, when you go on it, just navigate your way through it, and this is where we're going to be posting the workshop videos. So if you want to go back and revisit them or share them with anybody else, this is where you're going to be able to find them. And this is, next slide, please. This is a screenshot of the city of Stockton's stormwater page. Again, you're going to be able to find the criteria plan and other resources that are available to you for the city of Stockton here. And I'm sure they're going to be able to post the videos here. So you can use those two. That's what they look like, just so you have an idea of that you're on the right track when you're visiting these pages. Next slide. There are also other additional resources, including this FAQ. It's currently posted on both the city and the county stormwater program pages. We're going to update this document as needed to cover any additional questions that may not currently be addressed. So if we get some really good questions out of this Q&A today, we're going to incorporate them into this FAQ. So that's why it's really important that if you have any sort of question, engage with the resources and the people that we have available today, so that we can really get the most out of these workshops, and it's going to be to the benefit of other people that are going to be visiting the page in the future. So we want to make sure that we're fully engaged with anybody that might have any questions. So once we hit that Q&A, just go ahead and jump in there. This FAQ provides links to other valuable resources like the statewide trash amendments, a link to certified full capture devices and systems that are approved by DWR, the region-wide stormwater permit. Next slide, please. We also want to point out that the criteria plan has a number of tools and worksheets to assist with the various calculations and determinations that are made when a project has to comply with the requirements. These include volume reduction requirement summary worksheet, which can be found on Appendix B, volume reduction requirement calculator, that comes up as an Excel sheet and that can be found on the website. A maintenance agreement template can be found on Appendix D. A stormwater quality criteria plan template can be found on Appendix E, and an example calculation can be found on Appendix J. Next slide, please. And with that, that concludes our presentation for today. We look forward to answering any questions you may have. Feel free to jump in here, and I want to welcome Mario Caballero from the city of Stockton. He's going to facilitate the Q&A. So go ahead and take it away, Mario.
Thank you, Roy. We'll start by addressing questions that have come in the chat room. And the very first question, and before I get to that question, also feel free to continue to add additional questions as we go. You can also click on the hand icon as was indicated earlier so that we can call on you directly. If you are on the phone and cannot submit questions through the Teams platform, we'll reserve some time at the end to take questions from callers. We'll do our best to answer all of the questions today, but if we do run out of time, you can email Roy at the email address provided here on the screen. Any questions we don't have time for, he will follow up with you on or after the session. Also, just a reminder that a recording of today's workshop will be made available on the county's website after February 3rd. We will also put it on the city website as well, as Roy indicated a few minutes ago. All right, first question is from Stephanie Kong. Does this new stormwater criteria plan replace the multi-agency post-construction stormwater standards manual for San Joaquin County?
Mario, do you want me to answer that?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so this is Karen Ashby with Larry Walker Associates. It's a very good question, and the short answer to that is no, it does not. The longer answer is that the manual that Stephanie is referring to is the manual that's in place because of the Phase 2 permit. So it's a slightly different set of requirements, although like Alina mentioned, there's an incredible amount of overlap and similar approaches, but it is functionally a different manual for a different regulatory requirement.
Thank you, Karen. The second question is from Mary Elizabeth. Is the 2020 SWMP available for review? Now, I'm not positive if you meant the criteria plan that we're discussing now. If you are, the answer is yes. The two slides that Roy shared with you has the links to the SWQCCP, the 2020, and you can look at it there. Any other input from the panel?
Yeah, Mario, this is Karen again. I would agree with you. If the reference is to the criteria plan that we've just referenced, that is available through the website links that Roy identified. If the question is about the stormwater management plan, the answer right now would be no, because that document is still in draft form internally.
All right, thank you. Any questions? Any hand? Oh. Okay. So the last input on the chat was thank you. So I believe that was from Mary. Any questions? I can't see any of the hands raised, but okay, we got another one in the chat room. This is from Rosa Alvarez. It seems this applies to development projects. How do these changes impact CIP projects? Panel?
I mean, my take on that is that if a CIP project falls into one of those definitions of either a priority land use project or priority project, then yeah, so this plan would be subject to them.
Any other input?
Yeah, and I would agree with Alina. I think that's in the spirit of the document.
Okay, thank you, Rosa, for your question. Next question is from Stephanie Kong. This question is about biotreatment. Our contractors are finding that the plant media layer is settling into the gravel zone. Would a filter fabric product between layers be acceptable to prevent the layers from mixing?
That's a good question. I'm hesitant to say yes, so that the water doesn't necessarily compartmentalize. The point of this media is that you have infiltration, and the minute you put any kind of fabric between them, you're messing with that. I would say it depends on the permeability, whether or not it's permeable or not. If it's okay, I'm happy to research it some more and provide an answer later if I find anything on that. Sound good?
Okay.
I get the question. It's a good question, and I'll think about it.
Okay, Stephanie, just to reiterate, Alina will get back to answer that question more thoroughly. Anybody else in the chat, or raise your hand, or if anybody wants to chime in? Okay, we have a couple more. This one's from Michael Chung. How is the Npds requirement stormwater criteria plan different from the general construction permit?
I mean, the two require separate things. So the construction general permit is really for implementing best management practices while a project is under construction. So you're trying to reduce sediment and erosion at the construction site. Whereas this plan is really meant for post construction, like permanent BMPs essentially that you're putting in place to retain stormwater runoff on your project, to treat it before releasing it. So this would be like you're building something. While you're building, you implement the construction general permit requirements. After it's built, you implement this plan essentially. So there's a difference there.
Okay. Next question is from Camila Saviz. Are there any changes to the volume reduction calculator spreadsheet associated with the new plan?
No, I don't believe so. The volume reduction remains the same. Volume reduction requirements remain the same.
Yeah, and again, I'll support Alina's response. And I think the primary reason why there are no changes, I love that there's a heart, that's good, is that the trash controls that are implemented are really kind of an adjunct to those requirements. So they didn't really functionally change those requirements.
Very good. We'll continue waiting for more questions in the chat. Once again, you are able to ask any questions if you want to raise your hand, or once again, if you don't have Teams, you can also call in. Okay, we have another one. Keiko. Aside from the public transportation stations, are all priority land use projects also priority projects if greater than 5,000 square feet?
I think so. I'm trying to imagine the definitions. And yeah, industrial and commercial projects that are over 5,000 square feet are also priority projects. There might be a little bit of a different criteria for residential, so just pay attention to that one, because one is in terms of density, the other one in just in terms of number of housing units. But it's probably very close. There is a lot of overlap between the two definitions.
And I think the key to follow up on that is that you have to go look and put the litmus test, right? What type of project is it? And then whether or not if it applies as a priority project.
Right.
Okay, we're waiting for a bit to see if there's any more questions in the chat room. Please feel free. These are great questions. All right, we have another one from Travis Hazine. How will this affect current projects? When are these changes effective? Speaking for the city of Stockton, these changes went through council on January 26th. So we made it effective the 27th, since there was no changes to the proposed SWQCCP, which is the 2020 version. So to answer your question again directly, it would be starting January 27th. Any project after that, that becomes the effective date. I believe the county has a different effective date.
I think Matt could correct me here if I'm wrong, but I think any projects that we have coming in for review after the end of January are going to be required by the new criteria plan. Anything before that, we're still going to be using the old one.
That has been our intention. Everything else would be looked at as conditioned prior to or to the prior 2009 plan and requirements.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Once again, we'll take a moment to see if there's any other questions. Are there any callers on the phone that might have a question at this point? Okay, going once, twice. All right, thank you very much for the questions. As indicated before, I'll hand it back over to Roy.
Roy, you're muted if you're trying to speak.
Oh, okay, sorry about that. I hadn't realized I was still on mute. I want to thank Mario for facilitating the questions and answer section. I think this was a really productive discussion. I want to thank everybody who took the time to ask us these good questions. I think we had more questions in this workshop than we did in the previous one, so I want to thank everybody who shared. As we mentioned, both the city and county are resources for you for any additional follow-ups. I'm available to you. I'm sure somebody else at the city is available, Mario Caballero. But for any other questions, my phone number is listed right here, or you can send me an email by preference. You can send me an email, but either way, I'll get back to you. Please also visit our website for any additional resources. Also want to mention that, well, actually, this was the last workshop, so I think we're good to go. If you know anybody that couldn't attend this workshop or any of the previous ones, let them know that the videos are going to be posted by Friday on the county's website and on the city. So with that, I want to thank everybody for joining us and participating. Have a good day, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.